I was procrastinating on working on delivering an assignment when I got the notification of an animation by BTS through Weavers, and it was the perfect time for me to watch it. The animation starts with a text that it is inspired by the story of the 7 Howard students that went to university in uh, the Howard University in Chicago. I believe they are, because they're like, don't even get me started about Chicago universities. And anyways, not the point. um, and a little disclaimer that the actual historical events may disparage a little bit, and this is I'm so excited because I knew that they've been working on like the clash or convergence that there has been between the East and the West, and specifically Korea and America. I think they have had a very violent clash, and it's been particularly, there's been tensions in this clash. But I do think that the BTS members wanted to get in touch with like the American culture in a like sort of a more loving way, but because of the excess of American culture, we know that we know that, and this is a problem with the West in general. I have to pass some like obligatory classes, and they're particularly about like the creation of rationality on the West, and rationality is specifically based on exclusion and on measurement, and it's measured through the Western lens. So it is done in a particular way that if you are not Western, you're not rational, and therefore it in my opinion, it inherently encourages a certain kind of racism that has been permeating since like basically the Renaissance in Europe and traveled to the United States through like Calvinism. Anyways, this was a tension that was going to happen. And I've also been, since I've been diverging from my wants to do streaming, I've been researching the way that technology has advanced in order for us to have the current streaming technologies. And this is a fascinating topic because the technology of music seems to have been here for forever, at least in my lifetime, because as long as I've been alive, personal music devices and technology has existed. But in fact, in the timeline of history, it has only been here for such a short time. But some of the eldest devices where there have been recordings, it has been like thousands and thousands of years where they specifically use grooves in order to emit a sound that they wanted. And then this was translated into different technologies by the 1800s. And one of the technologies was the one showing the animation. And I forget the name of it, but it's this cylinder that has grooves and indentations. And there's a sort of sort of a needle that is able to conduct. This is amazing. This needle is able to conduct the waves of the sound and amplify it so that we can hear a recording of a music. To me, these topics are fascinating. I am extremely angered. I feel a lot of anger at the state of technology nowadays, to the point that I'm diverging from it. I'm not streaming. I'm looking for ways to divert from Google, that is impossible because I'm here in YouTube, and yeah, they're monopolies. However, technology, right, the way it's right now and why it's my enemy right now, is not like evil inherently. Technology is just a tool, and we can see that tool in those devices that are so ingenious. Like, I love that. You could have a philosophical debate on whether that recording is actually the first recording, because if you look back at the video where I read through the Arirang's research, the first actual like note recording of the Arirang was a little bit before that through an American missionary. And what he did is he wrote down what he listened, what he thought of it, and he wrote specifically to Koreans. Arirang, it's like to like something along the lines like to the art of Koreans. Arirang is like the rice that they eat. It's their sustenance, like for the soul. And so there have been notations like musical notations before that. So if you want to get really nerdy, the actual sound recording might have been then in Howard University, but you could say that recording the testimony of the Arirang in a different culture by this American missionary is a way of recording. This is just intriguing for me because the way knowledge is recorded and transmitted is important. Music is not knowledge per se; it's creation, but you can share music through notations, or through live reproduction, or through technological recording. So I thought it was cool that they added that disclaimer because I bet that they knew that there would be nerds like me who would have debates about it. But I love, and this is a commentary that I've been making about the convergence of the East and West, especially prompted by Namjoon's own explorations on it, his own exposition on the SF MoMA from the artworks he owns with like the conjunction of the collection of SF MoMA is about the converging of East and West. And we're at such a particularly important time because in that video, I mentioned how there had been growing tensions between specifically America and Korea. And I don't want to get into America right now, but they have been particularly violent to their allies and to their non-allies in different ways. And the way that the violence to their non-allies is reproduced in the violence to their allies is so different. And I'm gonna please watch this. This is an academic discussion on on how the American government specifically prevented a free deliberation of a new government for South Korea, and how I think it was Henry Kissinger caused severed a very nascent and like of the people movement to organize in a way that is different from the way that it ended up organizing. So Henry Kissinger played a big part on the new configuration of the new South Korea after it had been divided by the West through the Western geopolitical conflicts that they were like so radically pulled towards without them, like they didn't need to be in those conflicts about post-World War II and the Cold War, right? South Korea is South Korea. They were pulled into it because they had been colonized by Japan, and Japan had been involved in the Second World War. I'm getting very nerdy. I'm sorry, I am nerd. I am a nerd. That's why I study philosophy. Okay, so if you don't want nerdiness, just go to another place. Specifically through Japan getting involved. And so when the US won, rightfully, because I don't think anyone wanted the Nazis to win the Second World War, they had an immense leverage on the whole world. And this is like one of the biggest points of inflections for like globalization to actually to take place, because globalization had been taking place like since like the Ottoman Empire, but it was done in like radically different ways. After the Second World War, because the US had such a leverage on everyone, they influenced how the new world order came to be. They gave a lot of reparations and help to Europe and the countries that they have devastated. So they became actually some of the tightest allies of Germany and Japan. And their relationship was subordinated, but they were actually not as subordinated as, in my opinion, the South Korean society was. Because South Korea having been liberated from Japan, and Japan now being the partnership, like the global partnership that came out of that, it's something to study. Because anyways, so South Korea was now in a place where they had been liberated from Japan, thanks to the US, but also Japan, in having been defeated and having reconfigured in the way that the US wanted, with the people that they wanted, and of course, again, we don't want like Nazis, right? So in a way that was good. Still, there was like some sort of like governmental change, like transactional change, but it's still the same society, right? So yeah, again, Korea is now put in a place where they were strategic in a global affair that was none of their making. So after the World War, the new conflict that arose from it was the rise of left wing versus right wing, or communism versus capitalism. But I think that is a reduction. Anyways, oh my gosh, I'm in a tangent. In this era where two tensions were fighting in a globalized world that globalized in such a way because of war, and if we think of now that people are saying that the end of globalization is coming to an end because of a potential. Anyways, wow. So South Korea became sort of like a pawn, but it was actually also a like, do you want to be a pawn that is allied to the order that is ruling the world, or the one that is not? So South Korea was very strategically important to the US because of their proximity to both North Korea, China, their placement in the world, like in that part of the world, and so geopolitically and ideologically. So there has been this undercurrent of having good relations, but I don't know, like there's something to be said about the power of relationships. After that, like very violent change, came the evolution and the rise of the Korean economy and the Korean culture, which mirrors, like whenever there's a culture in history that has abundance of capital and stability and access to good resources, they have created cultures that have been admired throughout the world and throughout history. So it was, in my opinion, it was only a matter of time so that the South Korean culture could get globalized in that way. And it took about 100 years. And because of all of these conditions, look at how amazing history is. All of these conditions that are societal, political, economical, fair or unfair. I'm not trying to add. I have my value judgment, but I'm not going to share it. Came a time that Korea was going to have someone, or like part of its culture had been allowed to flourish because of the lack of conflict that they sort of faced. That something amazing was gonna come out, and that I think was BTS. But in a sense, that was also a threat to like the hegemon of the American culture, because being replaced by another culture that is in theory your ally, but has always been an ally in this like subordinated nature. And I don't want to say that it, please, I don't, not because of like, how can I say this? I mean, the US liberated them, and then they had been in a, there are military bases there, and a lot of their economy is because, I mean, anyways, I'm not trying to do any value judgment. This is not for me to judge. But there is a certain transactionality and not looking eye to eye, but because they were able to develop at such a way from like coming from such bad conditions of having been liberated from occupation, having a fractured country, and then given the conditions and possibilities to develop its own nature that had been always there, but haven't been able to, yeah, you need to have the access to resources to develop it. Otherwise you are like in a senseless, like wanting to just survive. Came ahead to the US, that is now very obviously a declining empire. That was meant to cause a lot of tension. And so what, and I think that hurt BTS, if I may interpret it, because they came to the US as a loving, in a loving way. They loved the American culture. They were educated on it. And so I think many people nowadays make the mistake of saying, oh, Koreans just appropriated American culture, but they don't have the historical understanding of how that culture transfer happened. And it was a transfer, it wasn't an appropriation. Like the powers, like this, the imbalances of power are such that Korea didn't have the upper hand on the US. So the US rather, sort of, in a way you could argue, like imposed its culture. And that culture was appreciated and was loved. Like, who doesn't love 2000s R&B? Like, honestly, that is revolutionary. Anyways. But when so there's a saying of never meet your heroes, because like historically speaking, when you meet someone or something that you admire so much, it tends to create tension. And this has been particularly important to me because I fell back in love with philosophy because of Schopenhauer. And now I'm reading like very precisely Nietzsche so that I can develop my thesis on language. And Nietzsche had fallen in love with the philosophy of Schopenhauer, but at some point they had to divert so that Nietzsche could create his own thing. Otherwise, he would just have been a comentarist or comentarista. like a note taker on Schopenhauer. But because Nietzsche has such a great, I mean, Nietzsche is Nietzsche, regardless of what you think of him. Um, by the way, horrible that I love both of their philosophies, because I really dislike the men. Um, so I think the genius of BTS was so high that they came to the US in a loving nature. They wanted to share and learn and produce, like in a poetic way, like in a sense, what they have learned and they had admired from the US and the American culture, and they were violently rejected, which causes tension. I mean, I don't think we can say that the period between 2017 to 2022 had been easy for BTS. They specifically talked about how they wanted to disband at some point, or they thought of disbanding at some point in the 2018, or and then they came back with more resolve force than ever, and still they persevered, even in the face of such struggle. And I'm I'm reading also part of like why Nietzsche was like interested in being like as someone who caused tension and make the other uncomfortable, was because the uncomfortable nature of the like a genius nature is to like wake up all of these like senseless things that you have there, you know, like yeah, you have to create, you have to make it incidir, like create a change, like almost dominate the world to create. But that is something that causes tension. That is lonely. That is a lonely path. And even if BTS has been able to connect with the fans from like all over the world, they still are in a lonely path. And so, and which is also interesting because precisely Nietzsche talks about how to fix like this broken and decrepit side of like culture is through loving recognition, which is something that I actually hadn't noticed until um, a s- fellow a fellow student of Nietzsche pointed it out to me, like how important the loving recognition of the other is to a part of Nietzsche's philosophy in order to create and make this like be this healer, as in like a myth, like a doctor of culture, to create better ways of seeing the other person instead of imposing your will on the other. And Nietzsche specifically talked about love. So this whole comeback is for me. I feel so much tension and anger at the world right now. I don't want to talk about why, but you can look at my past videos. I think there's been censored. Or I'm just bad at this thing. The latter is the most likely. um, but yeah, I talked about how I feel like Jean-Paul Sartre when he wrote La Nausée. Nothing makes sense. I feel we're in a very stupid time in the world, and I feel genuinely depressed. Like I'm having breakdowns during the day. Um, so I love that BTS is specifically focusing on what is your love and the history of this tension of the convergence of cultures that is so messy. It's messy. You cannot say it's all good and it's all bad. It's just messy. It's gray and it's green and it's great. And it creates tension and sadness and anger. It's messy. It's life. And a way of like thinking about it, it's about thinking on love, how to love the other in their imperfect nature, how to love a community that is able to help you face like the suppressing will of the world. Um, So yeah, BTS, what is your love song? As much as it is an artistic proposition, in my opinion, it is also a philosophical proposition on facing circumstances that are so rancid and decrepit and terrible and heartbreaking, and making a change instead of falling into the trap of that anger, choosing a different path of loving recognition, of creation, of community. Anyways, I love this. I'm so excited. Clearly, oh my gosh, I need to finish this thing that I'm writing. Anyways, I love BTS. I love the animation. I want to theorize more. So thank you for watching. Until next time, I fucking love you and see you. And remember to be excellent to one another. Bye.